Hello, everyone, and welcome to So You Want to Work in Sports. We are so glad that you could join us today. We're excited to share today's panel with you as an introduction to sports broadcasting. Today's panelists have experience across radio, television, collegiate, and professional sports. We'll be talking about how they got their start, hearing about challenges they've overcome, and celebrating some of the successes and fun stories they've found along the way. Thank you so much for being a part of today's conversation. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the DePaul Athletics YouTube channel at a later date. My name is Jessica Lay. I am a double demon currently in the MBA program through DePaul's Kelstadt Graduate School of Business. I'm the graduate assistant for DePaul Athletics Marketing and on the advisory team for our Blue Crew. I finished my time as an undergrad here at DePaul in 2019 and finished my degree in political science. We're thrilled to share today's panel with you. DePaul students, our current Blue Crew president, Quinn Komprosky, will be joining us later to raffle off some amazing prizes at the end of today's session. So please take the time now to submit your name and student ID number to the Q&A function for a chance to win. You'll have to be live in attendance to get your prize, and reminder that this raffle is only available to DePaul students and we'll be verifying your information prior to mailing out the prize pack. Today's lucky raffle winner will be sent an exclusive prize bundle of DePaul swag provided by the DePaul Athletics marketing team. Please submit your information now and we will announce our winner after our conversation with the panelists. We will also be opening time towards the end of the panel to answer audience questions, so you can submit your questions via the Q&A function all throughout our conversation today. As a reminder, we do ask that you keep your questions both respectful and career focused, and we will get to as many of the audience submissions as possible before the end of today's webinar. We will also be giving you information on how to follow along with each of our panelists after today's session if you'd like to see what amazing things they're up to outside of our conversation today. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our panel, followed by today's moderators. Jason Benetti is a TV play-by-play announcer for ESPN and the Chicago White Sox. He joined ESPN in 2011 and has called Major League Baseball, college football, basketball, baseball, and lacrosse on television, in addition to NFL and MLB games on ESPN radio. Benetti is also the play-by-play announcer for ESPN's award-winning and innovative StatCast coverage team for Major League Baseball. Benetti has called White Sox games since 2016 and became the team's lead announcer in 2018. In addition to his local work with the White Sox in Chicago, Benetti has served as a TV announcer for the Bulls of the NBA since the 2018 season. Jason is the only major TV network announcer with cerebral palsy. He's an ambassador for the Cerebral Palsy Foundation, and in partnership with CPF, Benetti created the Awkward Moments campaign, an animated web series which raises awareness of life with a disability through humor. Benetti graduated from Syracuse University in 2005 with a bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism, economics, and psychology. He then went on to earn his JD at Wake Forest School of Law in 2011. Lisa Byington has become a trailblazer in the broadcasting world. Most recently, this past March, she became the first female play-by-play to work the men's NCAA basketball tournament for CBS and Turner Sports. Prior to that, she has also helped open the door in the college football and professional sports worlds as well. In 2017, Lisa made history as the first female play-by-play voice for a college football game for the Big Ten Network. Shortly after that, she was part of an MLS game and what is believed to be the first all-female broadcast of any of the 5 major men's professional leagues. In the last 2 years, she has filled in as play-by-play for some Chicago Bulls television broadcasts, becoming one of the few females to do play-by-play on the NBA circuit. She first appeared on the Big Ten Network during the network's opening football weekend in 2007, and she's been a part of the Fox Sports and Big Ten Network lineup for more than a decade in a variety of roles. Lisa has had the opportunity to work the Women's World Cup in 2019 for Fox, as well as the men's NCAA basketball tournament since 2017. Lisa was a 2-sport athlete in her time at Northwestern, and Byington played both soccer and basketball. She helped her teams advance to the NCAA tournaments in both sports and earned academic All-Big Ten recognition. Scott Vyverman was a professional music DJ and newscaster prior to working in higher education full-time. He was heard on WLS, WLIT, and other stations in Chicago during his radio career. He has been at DePaul since the fall of 2001. In addition to teaching journalism and related media courses, he manages DePaul's 2 award-winning streaming radio stations. Radio DePaul was named Best College Radio Station in 2020. Additionally, they were named Best Online College Station in both 2012 and 2013. The station was a finalist for 28 National State College Radio Awards in 2015 and walked away with 12. Overall, Radio DePaul has been a finalist for over 100 national and state college radio awards since 2010. Radio DePaul Sports provides hands-on learning opportunities for students to host sports talk shows and announce Blue Demon games, including men's and women's basketball. Today's webinar will be moderated by myself and the wonderful Jessica Lazo, a current DePaul student athlete. So I will hand it over to the other Jessica to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Jess Lazo and I am on the DePaul women's soccer team. I'm currently a senior studying sports communication and I'm looking to pursue a career in sports broadcasting. So I'm really excited to be here and we're so glad to have you all here today too. So to start things off, our first question for the panel is, the sports industry is very competitive to work in. So how are you guys able to get your foot in the door?
Let's kick it off with Lisa.
So my first job was in a place called Alpena, Michigan, and no part of me when I graduated wanted to work in Alpena, Michigan. Like I was ready for I was certain that I was ready for ESPN right out of the gates. And it actually took to talking to a few friends where they said, look, you have to sort of work your way into the business. You have to grind a little bit. And it's not where you start, it's where you finish, right? And so I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I had to learn is just sometimes the grunt jobs where you have to do a little bit of everything are the best jobs. Because number one, you appreciate all the roles. Like I had to throw a camera on my shoulder up in Alpena, Michigan. I worked for a local affiliate. So I went out on a Friday night, threw the camera on my shoulder, and I was shooting like 3 to 4 high school football games at the time. I'm coming back, I'm editing my own stuff, I'm writing my own stuff, I'm running into the bathroom, I'm throwing on air clothes and doing my hair and makeup. And so now when I don't have to do all that stuff, I still appreciate some of the people who do have to do some of those roles. So don't be afraid of the grunt job, and don't be afraid of learning at this level so you can get up to that level.
To build on what Lisa said, and I sort of took the minor league baseball route rather than the local TV route, but I think Lisa and I had similar experiences. Like I was unfolding chairs and putting up picnic tables in an A-ball stadium and things like that, and saying like, I'm not even good at this, so why am I doing it? And the answer is because you just need to do, like, I'm big on the Malcolm Gladwell focused practice. Like you need to do all of these things a lot. You need to learn how to call games. You need to learn how to be a reporter, but not just like go to the ballpark and do the game. You need to say, where can I get better? How can I improve? I got some really good advice early in my career about my voice, about things I could do to make the broadcast more entertaining and more exciting. And my first thought, if I'm being totally honest, was a couple years out of college, was, why is this person being so rude? My tape is better than he thinks. And that's just not true. Like everybody thinks they're better than they are when they are young, because, you know, if you have ambition and you know what good is, we all have taste when we get into this. You think you're really good, and you are for your age, but there are always things you can refine. So what I would say in part, as you do these jobs that will get you opportunities to get reps, number one, really take advantage of them. Try to get better at something every night. And then number two, when people give you advice, when you go ask somebody you respect for advice, they're not trying to tear you down. They really want to help. But sometimes we're all performers. We all want to, in order to like get on a stage or be on the air, you have to have some sort of an ego, whether it's right or wrong. You just have to have that in order to think somebody should be listening to you talk. When somebody gives you advice, make sure to actually take it to heart rather than be slightly offended by it. And I've been defensive before in the past, and, you know, for varying reasons, and I'm sure we all have. The more you can actually hear that advice and take it and go beyond where your current level is, that's my philosophy.
Professor Vyverman, what about you? What made you realize that this was where you wanted to go?
I won't go all the way back, but I think my mom would tell you that I came out of the womb talking and probably talking too much. As Jason said, we all like to perform. We all like to talk. That's why we do this. And I fell in love with a show called WKRP in Cincinnati when I was a kid. In high school, people would tell me, man, you've got a voice for radio. And it kind of got stuck in my head. And I'm like, well, radio seemed like a cool job on TV. And everyone says I would sound good on the radio. So I should probably do that. And, worked at my college stations overnight, lugging my records at 2 a.m. to the radio station to play. Yes, we still played records back then. And then to echo what the other panelists have said, you start at the bottom. So I started at 92.5 WDEK in DeKalb, and I worked there. I worked on the AM station, and DEK was in an old house, somebody's house that had been converted into a radio station. We'll call it radio station. And we played records, on the radio. I was reminiscing the first day on the air, the microphone fell off the boom. And, so you start there. And I went from there to Rockford, to Waukegan, to Chicago. And as Jason said, about ego, even when I was in college, I thought I was amazing. And then I listened back, to how I actually sounded. And my voice was up here, 88.1 FM, WCRX. And I thought, God, why did I think I was so good? And then I got to DeKalb and I sounded a little more like me and just sort of worked my way up. And by the time I got to Chicago, I felt like I could actually do this, that I sounded good. And I think to the others' points, it's all about the reps. No market is too small. It's all about the reps. Every day you get better on the air. And hopefully if you make it to the big time, that's your time to shine. And so I feel like I did my best work at the last radio station I worked at, but of course that's the one I got fired from. So who are you going to believe,
That's all great. And I think those are all really good points. Lisa pointed out, you think you're ready from day one for those big markets, and there's a lot of groundwork that you have to do. So for Lisa and Jason, broadcast is a pretty wide market of jobs that you could be looking for. What made you think that, sports broadcasting specifically was the way that you wanted to go? Was there a tipping point for you that made you say, sports is where I want to be in this part of the industry?
For me, you mentioned I played basketball and soccer at Northwestern, and for me, it was the realization that, I can't play basketball and soccer forever. For the rest of my life, I would love to. And so I love sports. And so it got to the point, it was like my freshman and sophomore year, and Northwestern has a great journalism program. And so I started to take a few more classes. I wasn't quite in the school yet. I wasn't quite in Medill yet, because I didn't know if that's what I wanted to do. And the more classes I took and the more realization where I'm projecting myself, like, what do I really want to do when I can't pick up a basketball or kick around a soccer ball for the rest of my life? I want to be around basketball or soccer or baseball or softball or football, And I realized, I think it was, my parents and some people who I really trusted, where they said, you got to you're blessed if you can pick a profession where you don't feel like you're working. And I can honestly, to this day, say when I'm prepping for games and it's hours and hours and you're learning about teams and coaches and their storylines, I never feel like I'm working. I feel like I'm learning. And I wish everyone, whatever occupation or profession they choose, that's the feeling that they have day in and day out.
I was lucky enough. Now I'm going to sound like Ted Baxter from the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which is a reference for all of 2 people on this Zoom, I think. It all started with a small radio station in Flossmoor, Illinois. I had a high school radio station, so I was really lucky. Like, I found some really good friends my sophomore year of high school by going to the radio station, and we were really lucky to get to do football and basketball and baseball at Homewood Flossmoor in the south suburbs here in Chicago. So it was a place for me. And Jess, you mentioned in the intro that I have cerebral palsy. It was the first place where I felt that I could do something pioneering and really good, because honestly, when you're on the radio, nobody's looking at you. So like, as a kid, I don't know how freeing that is until I do it. Like, people react differently to me, even to this day, as I walk down the street. And radio is the first place where, like, I just got to be me. Like, people heard me first and then met me second. And it's the rare place where if you have something funny about how you walk or look, the work matters first. And so that's why I got into it initially. Then I was like, oh, you know what? Like, I'm kind of good at this. Like this, maybe this works out. And then, I went to college for it and have been doing games ever since. But I knew that if I was going to do this, I wanted to do play-by-play. Like there might be some people in the crowd who just want to do play-by-play. And I would say, if you feel that strongly about it, go find games to do. And if somebody says, hey, here's a job where you won't have games to do, find a way to make those tapes and get better at the job that you really want to do. Because I completely agree that you have to start in smaller markets. But I also, I never had a passion for sports talk. I just don't really enjoy it. I never really had a passion for sports updates and things like that. I wanted to describe the action. I wanted to be at the game and do play-by-play. So for me, it was a high school radio station that got me there. And it was a feeling more than a love for it immediately, although I grew up watching a ton of sports and would sit in my room and play video games and do play-by-play, which, as you can probably guess, I didn't have 100 friends in high school, because that gets annoying for people.
That's great. So Professor Vyverman, I want to ask this of you too. So you worked in professional radio and then made the transition to higher education. Can you tell us a little bit about that move? What made you say, I want to help the people who are trying to get their start?
Well, clearly, first and foremost, I did it all for the money, because as we all know, higher ed is where the big bucks are. So I was working in radio. I was working in Waukegan. I was working at Windy 100 FM. And one of my former teachers at Columbia College, Cheryl Morton Langston, who was really a mentor to me and meant so much to me. And I do recommend that for anyone, going to school, whatever you're studying, find somebody to sort of sidle up to, find somebody who you believe is a mentor. She had worked at KDKA in Pittsburgh, which for you radio historians out there was the first radio station ever. So I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. Like, you worked at KDKA? That's amazing. And so she was this mentor, and she reached out to me and she said, you love to talk and you know radio, and we're looking for teachers at Columbia College. Would you be interested? And I said, absolutely. I didn't even ask her what it paid. I didn't even know if I was going to be paid. I'm just one of those people who loves experiences. So, my first radio job was an FM radio job playing music, but then they asked me if I wanted to do some stuff on the AM station. Did I want to engineer Bulls games? And I was like, the Michael Jordan Bulls, you want me to play the commercials and stuff during their games? Of course I want to do that. So it's just about gathering those experiences and building on things. And I was given the opportunity to teach, which I took from there to St. Xavier and the Illinois Center for Broadcasting, and then lucky enough to get this job at DePaul. And it all kind of came together. And most of my friends who worked in radio with me are insanely jealous that I have this job at DePaul, that I've had this job at DePaul so long, and that my office is at a radio station. So for that kid who fell in love with radio, I go to work at a radio station every day, which is just the coolest thing ever. So, yeah.
So just to piggyback off of this question, specifically for Lisa, athletics is a male-dominated field. How have you made space as a woman, and how have you continued to make space for other women looking for a career in sports?
Well, I think you do the best that you can, and you try to work hard, and you're credible at your job. And if you do those two things, then I think that opens up the door for the next opportunity. But I'll say this, and I really truly believe this. You obviously have to, or I obviously, and other women in the business have to take advantage of the opportunities that we're given. But the opportunities have to be there too, and so that starts with management. And sometimes, and I hate saying this, but sometimes I think it has been a scary decision for some people to put a woman in different positions where they haven't been before, in non-traditional roles. We're always, I think, accustomed to seeing a woman as a sideline reporter, and sometimes even if I see a male sideline reporter, I'm kind of taken aback now, because that has been the female role. And so it has taken women having the courage to be in roles that aren't always as traditional. But again, it also takes people who have the courage to put women in those roles. So, we all have to have allies everywhere. And sometimes it starts way at the top.
That's a great piece of feedback, Lisa. And I think that you being such a trailblazer is just so inspiring for me specifically, but also I think for everybody in attendance today to see, you know, it's not just the courage of you to step up and say, hey, I can do this job, but also the courage of the organizations to say, this is a fantastic professional and she deserves to be here in these roles as well. So it's been great to see those pieces too. Jason, I have a question specifically for you. So you worked on a great series through the CP Foundation called Awkward Moments. I know we mentioned that during the introduction. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the idea behind this series and what you want people to take away from the segments? Because I had the opportunity to watch a few of them and they are fantastic. It's such a great bit of segment on just explaining what life is like through all of that humor.
Yeah, I don't like wallowing about having a disability as much as I can because I don't think it's productive, but I do sometimes. There are moments where it's hard, and I do want to say before I get into that, I was on Sarah Spain's podcast, Sarah Chicagoan, fantastic at what she does. I was on her podcast a couple of years ago, and we were both sort of describing what we deal with, me with a disability and her as a woman in sports and sports broadcasting. And I actually think it was really interesting. We both sort of said, hey, I've heard that before, but it's kind of what I've experienced. Like, I don't think the experience is all that different. And I think it's the contours are different, but the core of it is the same, because as Lisa was talking, I've had similar experiences where it takes somebody to say, you know what, I don't care that his eye drifts. We'll put him on camera. I don't care that he can't play in our golf outing. We want him on our broadcast. And so I think this is why I love Lisa, and I'm so glad we're friends, is because I think we've had shared experiences. And I don't want to be presumptuous and say that any minority has the same experience, but I think the essence of the experience is the same. And all of the different outskirts are different, but the essence of it is the same. It's that make the work as good as possible, and we shouldn't have to hope that there are decision makers that latch onto that. The odds should not be loaded dice. They should simply be, hey, if the work's good enough, we put the work on the air, and there shouldn't be extra bonus obstacles, even in coded language and things like that. Like when a coordinating producer says, we're very understanding of Jason's situation. Well, I don't have a situation. I'm an announcer. Like, do you want me to do the game or not? So, part of the reason for the collaboration with the Cerebral Palsy Foundation was I wanted to have a couple laughs. Like, I think humor is the best way to attack these repetitive experiences that I have. Like, one of the cartoons we did is me at a museum, and the person who works at the museum very concerned that I'm going to knock the vase over because I stagger when I walk. And it's like, no, I'm not going to break your thing from Giza. I'm just here to look at it. I promise you I'm not going to break it. If I break it, I'll buy it, but I'm not going to get that close to it. I think people just have this exaggerated opinion, this shrunken opinion of what people with disabilities can do. And anybody who's a minority, I think the majority who accidentally sometimes has an opinion or a judgment tries to shrink the world. And I think the world's better when it's open and more curious. And so that's why we did that with CPF.
That's fantastic. And I love your point too, that teaching with humor is a good way to open the conversation. I personally loved watching it, but I know that makes those awkward moments easier for everybody to learn from too. So it's a really great segment. If anybody in the audience has a chance to watch it, I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
But speaking of teaching, Professor Vyverman, you work with students every day who are trying to get their start, like we mentioned. What would you consider like the number one thing that you want students to know before they graduate about getting into this industry, whether it's sports broadcasting specifically or just being a broadcaster in general? Do you have sort of that one thing that you're like, everyone needs to know this before they become a professional?
Yeah, I think it's reflecting back on my earlier point that you're probably going to be awful when you start, and that's okay. That's what I love about college radio. The more awful, the better, if that's a sentence. This is a place to learn, and that's what I tell them all, that today was bad, tomorrow will be a little bit better. And the more you do it, the more experience you get, the more confidence you get, the better you'll be. And the more experiences, don't say no. If you're able to do something, do it, right? And I mean, I've had guys and gals who called DePaul men's basketball. I don't want to bring up any sore subjects because it's a great time. We're turning a page here at DePaul for men's basketball, but who never got to call a DePaul men's win, right? In their entire broadcasting careers at DePaul, they never got to. So that's okay. And I try to tell them, I'm like, listen, anybody can call a great team on a 30-game winning streak, right? Everybody's in a good mood on Christmas, but try to be in a good mood when you've never called a winning basketball game at the Allstate, right? Or now the new arena, and be good at it. Like I don't want to hear you being bummed, right? You're trying to be a professional. You're at least semi-professional at this point. I can't hear you bummed as a listener of the game. You have to call the game square and fair and be even and balanced. And it's not about who's winning and losing. It's about you doing your job and being a professional. So I would say that, to summarize, basically, don't say no if you can say yes. Be okay with being awful because you'll get better. Get as many experiences as you can. Do as many games. If it's doing a softball game and you get interrupted by the L constantly, as we do, if you're doing soccer and you get interrupted by the L, that's okay. As Jason said early on, things go wrong, bad things happen when you're broadcasting, and being prepared for that is really key. You see television broadcasters, you can tell which ones used to work in radio, because when the teleprompter's not working, that's when they really shine. Robin Baumgarten on WGN, she shines when that teleprompter's not working because she was on radio and she just knows how to roll. So don't say no, do everything, be fine with being awful, and work your way, get those experiences. And if you make it, great. Until you get there, as they say, fake it till you make it. That's my advice.
One quick story about that, if you'll indulge for 15 seconds. And just real quick, in the minor leagues, there was a very small crowd one night in Frederick, Maryland, and our crowd mic was sticking out of the window in the press box. And so we were picking up this very small group of people. And every time the pitch was coming, they would yell swing at the batter very loudly, to the point where we could not ignore it. So my partner and I, Joel Godet, who does some games on CBS Sports Network, works for Ball State. My partner and I, when we were doing play-by-play, when there was a swing, we would just go, and the pitch, and they would yell swing, and I go, and a ground ball to short, because there's no reason for me to say swing because they're doing it. You have to deal with your environment. So however you can use the L, I would say use it. It shows agility and deftness, and I think that's really, really important.
Such a great point. And it always throws them off the first time it happens. They're in the middle of saying something and the L rumbles through, but they eventually do learn how to incorporate that into the broadcast. And I try to remind them, I say, well, what your job is as a radio broadcaster is to paint a picture. We're not there, but you are. So use anything you can. The birds chirping, if they're having an opera just outside, just off mic, that's okay. Use that to your advantage. Make that a part of the ambiance and the experience of the broadcast, and the listeners will benefit from it.
Speaking of experiences, can you guys tell us about your coolest working in or teaching broadcast moment? Maybe someone you met, something you got to do, a competition you were in? Let's start with Jason.
Can Lisa and I both say the Texas versus Abilene Christian game? Because I was on radio and Lisa was on TV. Mine's working with Bill Walton and the hyper curious nature of the tie-dye crazy man. I love the guy, and I just love seeing where his mind goes. But Texas Abilene Christian is very, very close for me.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that. What a finish and stuff, and what a story that was. I think I would stay in the NCAA tournament for me, but I would go a few years ago, so 2018, and I was actually a sideline reporter at the time, and I was covering Loyola Chicago. And so everyone remembers their run to the Final Four and the Sister Jean story. And we got to do the regionals. So we got to do the Sweet 16 games and the Elite 8 games. And to see her work behind the scenes, okay, and to see how authentic she is. And I just share a story where they won to get to the Final Four. And so we had to wheel her in her wheelchair to a special room to do the post-game interview. And just to make sure that she could hear us and that everything was calm. And so she had her, the ball caps that they all hand out, right? The championship ball caps. And she had it in her hand. And she looks at me before we start the interview and she says, "Now, should I wear this frontwards or backwards? Because all the kids wear it backwards." And I said, "Well, Sister Jean, then you have to wear your ball cap backwards." And then, in her other hand, she's got a piece of the net that they cut down and they gave her. And she said, "Could you help me put this in my net?" And so here's Sister Jean with a backwards ball cap. And I put like the net, how you do, like right in the front and stuff. And we took a photo before we started the interview. And it still is one of my all-time favorite memories. Obviously to just sit there and interview her, but just the exchange beforehand that I wish we were rolling on it, that no one got to see, and just how genuine she was. It was great. It's still one of my favorites.
I had a brush with greatness because I didn't, strictly speaking, work in sports broadcasting, but I'm actually thankful to DePaul Athletics for this brush with greatness. There was a DePaul marketing sports kickoff lunch thing at McGrath Phillips. And I just back up a little bit. I'm a lifelong fan of DePaul basketball, DePaul men's basketball. I grew up with Coach Ray. I started following them in 1979 when they sadly lost in the Final Four. But those 80s teams, Rod Strickland and Ty Corbin and Dallas Comegys, man, I love that team. My dad and I would go see them at the Allstate Arena, which I think maybe was still the Horizon at the time. Anyway, I'm a big fan of Coach Ray. And I went to this luncheon, and I didn't want to bother him, So I left, and I had forgotten something on my table, and I went back in, and Coach Ray was sitting at a table by himself. There was no one else in there, no people, no handlers. And I thought, this is my opportunity. So I went up and I introduced myself to him, and I gushed all over him because he's just the greatest ever, And I'm just so happy that I have that moment, that I got to meet Coach Ray. And I said, "Coach Ray, can I help you? Is there anything you're doing?" He said, "I'm just waiting for my wife. She's going to pull up in front here." She pulled up in front. I walked out with him. He hopped in his car and off he went. It was the only time I ever got to meet Coach Ray. But I just showed my son around DePaul the other day, and I went by the Ray Meyer Center. And I said, just understand, most students here probably don't know, but the Ray is a reference to Ray Meyer, and he's the greatest. So anyway, that's my brush with sports greatness.
I love that. I was actually a tour guide during undergrad. And so when we would introduce the Ray Meyer Fitness Center, we would talk about Coach Ray and all the great things that he did. But I don't think it was till I started working with DePaul Athletics that it really sunk in what a great he truly, truly is. So I love that. What a cool experience to have, just being on campus. So everybody kind of talked about, starting in smaller markets and how that's sort of a sacrifice that you have to make to get your foot in the door. But when you're early on in your career, where did you find support, and how did you make those decisions with like where you wanted to go? Maybe did you have a mentor, or maybe somebody at one of your first jobs that was really encouraging to you? How did you find that support as someone who's a broadcaster, besides just, that inner confidence and ego that comes from wanting to be a broadcaster? But maybe tell us a little bit about mentors or somebody that you found support with when you were starting off your career. Lisa, can we start with you?
You sure can. I think it's like, for me, I always wanted to target and to talk to people who were already doing what things that I wanted to do. Number one, to kind of pick their brain about how they got there. And then number two, just to ask questions just about the job, And so I mentioned that I had some advice from some friends who said, it's not where you start, it's where you finish. And so I had to gulp and take a deep breath and say, okay, I'll work in Alpena, Michigan, which was not my dream job at the time, but I'm so thankful that I did. And that piece of advice actually came from someone who worked in Alpena, Michigan, and now had worked in a larger market in the state of Michigan. He was still in the local TV world, but that's where he got his start, and so that was meaningful for me to hear someone who had already been there and done that. And I think your world grows as you're in the business a little bit. I didn't know many people in the business, I know that Jason and I, we were on like a Zoom call with some colleagues, right? And a producer in the business was running it, and we were actually watching games. And so we're all learning from each other. And I thought it was during the pandemic, and it was one of the ways to kind of pass the time. And I just thought that was one of the coolest things to do, is, you know, to sit down with someone like Jason, who I totally respect. And I was asking him questions during some of those sessions, like, Jason, what do you do here? Or how do you do this? Or how'd you get good at that? And so I think as you're in the business, your curiosity grows, and your wealth of people to tap into grows. And the last thing I'll say is, if you can find that one person who can give you true, honest feedback, as we've talked about, like, latch onto that person and don't let them go, because that is so, so valuable to have in your circle.
For so many of us, that is producer extraordinaire Bart Fox. He's wonderful at giving straight up advice. When I was in college, I knew I wanted to do play-by-play, and this was back in the day when we had CDs. And so I would put my work on a CD, and I would just send it to, I feverishly tried to find announcers who I loved. And like Judd Apatow has his book where he interviews a bunch of comics at age 16 because he just wanted to go find all these people who were funny, because he just revered Saturday Night Live and Jerry Seinfeld and Gary Shandling. And I sort of did that with broadcasters. Like, I didn't care if they knew me or not. It's the only place, like, I'm scared of the world generally as an only child and somebody with a disability. Like, I think something bad's going to happen to me every time I walk outside. I'm joking partially, but I was fearless in terms of sending my work to people because I wanted to talk to them about how to make it better the next time. And so there were times when I was 20 or 21, and please pardon me for name dropping. I don't mean to name drop to say that we're best friends or anything. I say this because I was a nobody who had no connections, and they were willing to take my phone call. And I would encourage everybody to say, who do I revere? Who do I love? Let me go find them. Now, if there are people who you just want to meet because you saw them on a game once, at least be deep enough in your research to say, hey, I love what you did here. I love what you did there. Like, be specific about what you love about their work. Because if somebody you revere gives you advice, you're more likely to take it. So I was driving around Maryland, visiting a friend of mine right after college, and I got a phone call from a number that was not listed. And I was driving a rental car, and I picked up, and it was like, Jason, this is Bob Costas. And I had sent him a CD like a year ago. And I just pulled off. I was right by Pimlico, actually, the racetrack. And I pulled off, and I had this half an hour conversation with Bob Costas. And it was amazing. But the one moment that I had that really still sticks with me, and he remembers it, and he knows why he did it. And it was really important to him too. And I get a little choked up thinking about it, but Sean McDonough, I sent him a tape when I was a senior in college, and Sean called me, and he basically said, I think you can do this at a very high level at age 21. And I struggle to do the impersonation there because I don't want to make fun of Sean because I love him so dearly. But it is such a grand thing to have somebody you revere tell you that you have the chops to do this. And I carry that with me for every day of my life. And if you have people that you love, that you think are really important performers to you, or people that are role models, please go find them, not because you want them to know your name, but because you want them to talk to you about the work, and you want to learn the things that they might be able to hand to you, so you don't step in holes that they stepped in.
Yeah, and Professor Vyverman, I know that you mentioned, somebody at the Columbia that helped you get into teaching, but did you have any other mentors early in your career that were like, yes, you can do this?
Yeah, I did. I was really fortunate at Columbia because most of the teachers were working radio professionals. And so a lot of my teachers, I could hear them on the radio. And I really respected that. So one of my teachers / mentors, I'm Facebook friends with him today, I'm proud to say. His name is Steve Scott, and he was a name here in Chicago. He was on the radio. He did news on WLS. He's got the pipes of gold. He outpipes me every day. And I had Steve Scott for my broadcasting class. So every day when I walked in for a 3-hour class, I had this working radio professional that I could hear on the radio helping me, teaching me, guiding me, instructing me. And I had that across the board. So when I think about what we have to offer at DePaul, I think about Lawrence Holmes. who is the gold standard of sports talk radio. I know Jason said that sports talk wasn't his thing, and I get that. And for Lawrence, I mean, he just is such a real dude. And I love listening to him on the radio because you just feel like you're listening to a friend. There's no affect. There's no, it doesn't sound like he's broadcasting. It sounds like he's just being Lawrence talking into a microphone. Carol Maureen, Chris Bury, the list goes on and on. So if you're in a classroom and you're lucky enough to have one of these teachers that you have watched or can watch on TV or listen to on the radio or listen to their podcast, be a sponge. Everything they say, try to incorporate that. And then, I can sort of outdo Jason. He sent CDs out. I sent tapes out. That's how old I am. Little
Wow.
cassette tapes. I know. I sent out 100 cassette tapes. And I would run down to the mailbox every day to get the rejection letters. And I knew they were going to be rejection letters, but some of them really took the time, a personalized letter to tell me what I needed to do better or differently in my demo, what I needed to improve and work on while I was on the air. And some of them actually called me and I talked to them. And then eventually somebody offered me a job for $5.50 an hour. And I thought, I'm the richest man in the world. Someone is going to pay me to talk on the radio. Thank you. And that's how I got started. So I sponged off of my teachers and my mentors. I listened to what all these program directors told me, or I took what I thought was relevant and tried to apply it and get better and make my demo better. And then eventually I got a job, and the rest is history.
I love your point too about having working professionals as your teachers. I think that that's a really special opportunity that we have at DePaul, especially being in the city of Chicago, being able to observe such wonderful working professionals in the field, in the various colleges, but especially in terms of journalism and broadcast. So absolutely, anybody in the audience who's looking at broadcast, I highly recommend taking a look at our College of Communication. Well, thanks to all of our panelists for your feedback on those questions. I do want to open the floor now to a few questions we've received from the audience. So please feel free to continue submitting questions now as we're working through these. We'll get to as many as we can. But the first one comes from Xander, and he says, I know that all of our guest speakers call games for multiple sports. So from Sox games to Bulls games, college basketball, football, and even the Women's World Cup for Lisa. So can you explain sort of the process of being able to call multiple different sports, even if you specialized in just one originally? So maybe let's start with Lisa. Like you played basketball and soccer, obviously you were familiar with those, but moving around, you have to be familiar with all these different things. What was the process in being able to do that?
First, you have to get past your horrified reaction when you're told you have to do field hockey and gymnastics. You don't know a single thing other than just maybe watching the Olympics for gymnastics, and then you settle in and you realize that I think you need to tap into people who do understand the sport. And for me, it's also watching a lot of it. Like I immerse myself when I was first assigned field hockey, which was actually one of my first play-by-play assignments. I immersed myself in finding old field hockey games. And then I figured out who my analyst was going to be. And I don't know if a lot of people, I hope that people who are listening starting to understand the different roles in broadcasting, but the play-by-play is not going to be your expert, right? And so I had to realize I wasn't going to be the expert in these sports, but what I could do is cater to the expert, and the expert is your analyst. The analyst is the former player or the former coach. And so I spent probably 90 minutes, like the second day that I got my field hockey assignment, right? And I just sat there and I talked to our analyst, and she drew out, positions and strategy. Verbiage is really, really key, because things you're going to say in a field hockey game, you're not going to say in a soccer game. You're certainly not going to say in a football game or a basketball game. So it's understanding the wording and how people in that sport talk. So I think number one, once you get past the horror of doing something that you're uncomfortable with and don't have a whole lot of background in, what you do is you tap into and you find the people who are the experts in that sport to help you out.
Yeah, and Jason, obviously you work with the White Sox, but you've done work with the Bulls. What have you done to prepare yourself for all of those things?
I agree with Lisa on the horror factor, but curiosity is the number one trait that you have to have. You have to be interested in how people talk about the sport, as Lisa just discussed. But you also have to be willing to say, I don't know this, I don't know that, I don't know this. Like, teach me. You have to ask questions that aren't you like asking half a question to show that you know a little bit, and then half a question to know that you're being curious for the sake of it. Like, you literally have to say, I don't know this, please tell me. And that's like, you have to take the ego completely out of it. The other component, and this is where I'm happy I ended up going to law school, you have to read the rule book. Like, you have to know what's in the rule book. You have to know nuances of what's going on. Like, I just did a lacrosse game last weekend, and I hadn't done lacrosse for a couple of weeks. And with the opening face-off in lacrosse, they had outlawed something called the motorcycle grip, which is where you have two hands face down on the stick to start the draw. And I could have just gone into the game and said, like, oh, they outlawed the motorcycle grip, and made like a Harley Davidson joke or something like that. But I watched a bunch of YouTube clips of like how to do the motorcycle grip, and then alternatives to that grip. So if it came up in the game, I have to have a working knowledge of that. But I also, like, I know it's dense, but if you're going to do a sport 10 times in a season, even 5 times in a season, you really should cover to cover read the rule book. It's really dense. It's not exactly fun, but you should know the things that are in there that might come up. And Mike Tirico, to me, is so fantastic at that. There was a Monday Night Football game a bunch of years ago when he was doing Monday Night Football. There was a simultaneous catch, Packers and Seahawks, in the end zone at the very end of the game. And I'm sure he has people that are helping, but Mike knew the rule at the moment it happened. There was no digging. It was just like simultaneous catch. Here's the call on the field, and guys, here's the rule. And it was like, oh my gosh, how could you possibly know that? And the answer is, he knows the rule book back to front. I have an annotated rule book for college football, college basketball that I use an Apple Pencil on, like on an iPad, but I used to have tabs on like a hard copy of the rule book, because you just have to know where everything is in the moment. I feel no worse than when I don't know a rule immediately in a White Sox game. And you'll hear me, like, I'm going to quote chapter and verse of the rule book, especially if I have it right away. But if I don't, I'm going to go get it, because it drives me nuts. Like, Stoney can tell you, Steve Stone can tell you, I'm gone when we have a rules situation and we're in a break. I'm like digging to try to find the rule if I don't have it, because it drives me absolutely up the wall if I don't have it.
Someone in the audience asked, just in regard to your skill sets, how important is it to diversify your skill sets, such as writing, broadcasting, producing, video? How important is it to kind of understand all elements of journalism?
Can I take it one further? Can
Yeah.
I say, like, you got to know a lot about the world? I think everybody on this panel will say you absolutely should know how to produce a game, how to direct a game, how to write a piece, because it helps you know your colleagues at the very least, but there's also an important skill set there. But I have gotten so much out of learning the law and reading about improv comedy and a little bit about acting, and like just taking from great musicians or great comics and seeing what they do in performance on the air and trying to port it to what I do. So to me, every night we go on the air is a quiz of everything we know about the world at that moment. And I love bringing other things in that might surprise people. And when there's a gap in my knowledge, it's frustrating, because I feel like I've stalled the telecast or missed an opportunity to surprise the audience. And I had a high school teacher who told me, if you're going to go study journalism, make sure, that's why I had another major. He said, make sure that you learn something else as well, because journalism is covering a lot of different topics. And if you don't have touchstones in those topics, you're not doing it accurately. So that's, I have very strong feelings about that.
You know, I was just thinking back. I think it was Willie Gault, which is probably dating myself. He was a fast Chicago Bear wide receiver. And I recall, I think it was him, maybe it was Jerry Rice, but football players basically doing things like taking ballet classes, right? And things outside of football that would help them be better at football. And I think about broadcasters that I've known who have taken improv classes, to Jason's point, just to have that muscle memory, that ability to, no matter what happens, to be able to handle it and be cool under pressure, or whatever the expression is, right? And I think about some of the jobs I've had, the ridiculous jobs I've had, and it always comes back to the same thing. Like, I used to be a reporter for the Daily Herald, and I used to cover youth sports. So I would go and I would cover literally like little guy football, 8, 9-year-old football, and I would write up little recaps, and these things would be in the Daily Herald. But I think about all those jobs, and I think about, why did I do those jobs? It wasn't for the money, clearly. So why did I do them? And I think it's just my love of communicating, and just having that experience of whether I'm doing little stringer stories for the Herald, or writing for my high school newspaper, or hosting radio shows, or engineering Bulls games, like whatever I've done in my life, I think it always comes back to just my love of communicating with people and using words, to the points that were made earlier about knowing the lingo of sports. I've listened to some of the Radio DePaul sports games we've done, some people doing volleyball for the first time. And it's like, and there's a girl and she hits the ball, and then the other girl hits the ball. And I'm like, dudes, you have to learn a little bit about volleyball. So use YouTube, watch some volleyball games, learn the lingo, know the verbiage. So I think basically my point is, do as many things as you can. If you have a love of communicating, whether it's radio, television, podcasting, old school journalism in the newspaper, or new school online, whatever it is, learn and do as many things as you can so that you can be as valuable in the workplace as possible. You can't just be one thing anymore. You really can't. And so again, knowing what everybody does on the crew, I'm sure Jason and Lisa, what everybody does. You may not want to do their jobs, but you could if you had to in a pinch. And I think that's key.
So I would make a point of, if, I was working in Lansing, Michigan, also at a TV affiliate there. But anytime there was a TV truck that came in to do a Michigan State game, and I was not yet at the network level, I would actually ask if I could sit in the truck. And I'm so glad that I took the opportunity to do that, because I could now understand. I didn't know what a producer did. I didn't know what a director does. I didn't know what a technical director does. I didn't know how hard it was to come up with a graphic on the spot in game because someone's having a career high, and you're fumbling through the record books, and then you got to type something out. I mean, all of those jobs make me appreciate, now that I'm sitting in the play-by-play chair, if we're not seeing the replay right away, like, I kind of understand now sometimes why we're not, like, things don't go smoothly everywhere. I haven't sat in all of those chairs, but I've watched people sit in those chairs. And so now it makes me sort of appreciate if hiccups happen, or if something really great happens and I know that they had to jump through some hoops to get there. I appreciate it more because I've seen them actually work under duress to get stuff done.
Well, thank you guys for all of that feedback, and thank you to everybody who submitted questions. As I mentioned, a little bit later, we will be giving you information on how to follow along with all of our panelists after today's webinar, in case you want to hear more. So I do want to toss it over now to our DePaul students. It's the moment you've all been waiting for. It's raffle time. I'd like to introduce Quinn Komprosky. He is the current president of Blue Crew. He's going to give you a little bit more information and tell you our lucky winner of today's raffle.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today, and make sure you follow our Blue Crew accounts. Oh, this side right here on Instagram and Twitter, and make sure to add us to your D-Hub campus groups. You can also follow our beloved mascot Dibs on Instagram, Twitter, and now TikTok. So all the big three. You can also download D-Zone to get in all the know on all things DePaul athletics. And by pressing the little check-in now button, you can earn points for prizes that will be updated. Now for a raffle winner, little drum roll. I'm hearing all the drum rolls, and then we got some fancy lights. And now the raffle winner is Joel Jose. Woo! Yeah, congrats, Joel, and you'll be receiving a nice little prize package.
Congratulations, Joel. Thank you so much, Quinn. Joel, if you could please send your email address via the Q&A function so we can get your information and send you your prize. Thank you so much to everybody who participated. We're really looking forward to having you attend future So You Want to Work in Sports and athletic events. So make sure that you follow along with us on social media, like Quinn mentioned, and then add Blue Crew to your DeHub group so you can stay in the know on all of our upcoming events. I do want to give a final round of applause to all of our wonderful panelists who were a part of today's session. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us. We are so thankful that you could be a part of today's session. Wanted to give you guys some information on how to follow along with everybody following today's session. So you can find both Jason and Lisa on Twitter and Instagram. You will see their names here, as well as if you wanted to get in contact with Lisa, you can check out her amazing website. Professor Vyverman, you can email him with his contact information that you'll see here, but we would also recommend that you check out both radiodepaul.com and radiodepaulsports.com. You can also follow Radio DePaul and Radio DePaul Sports on all sorts of social media. We also would encourage you to follow along with DePaul Athletics. DePaulBlueDemons.com is the athletics website, and that bit.ly link that you'll see is very exciting because that will take you to the campus job board. If you're looking to get your foot in the door and work in sports right now, the athletics department actually has a few opening for jobs right now. So keep an eye on the campus job board, check those out. There's a few positions with a couple of different departments within athletics that are available to both undergraduate students as well as incoming graduate students. So please take a minute to check those out if you have the time. Also wanted to put on your radar a few upcoming events. So this weekend, track and field will be competing at the Marquette Invitational, and softball has a double header at Butler. That bit.ly link that you see will take you to the live stream through Butler if you would like to watch the game this weekend. And then, of course, keep up with all of our spring sports. Track and field has a few more meets coming up, such as May 7th, the Pacesetter Sports Invitational. If you want to follow along with any of the games or meets, you can go to DePaulBlueDemons.com and follow along with live game day stats and streams if they are available. So keep an eye out on DeHub and social media for more events. And like I said, you can check out the calendar at DePaulBlueDemons.com. And with that, I would like to toss it back over to my fellow Jess to take us home.
Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We are so grateful to our panelists for joining us, sharing their stories, and imparting their wisdom. As mentioned, today's session has been recorded and will be accessible for later viewing via the DePaul Athletics YouTube page. Thank you again for being here, and go Blue Demons.